My parents gifted my sister $560,000 to buy a house, but only told me, "You're the failure." So I cut off contact. 2 years later, my sister drove by my place and phoned Dad yelling, "You have to see?" They still can't get over what I did after that. Can you imagine being told your entire life that you're a disappointment, only for that so-called failure to become the greatest strength you never knew you had? What happens when your family disowns you for following your dreams, then suddenly wants a piece of the unexpected inheritance that changed everything? My name is Blake, and I just turned 32 yesterday. Standing here, on these 5 acres of woodland my grandparents left me, I feel a connection I never expected. This quiet piece of earth, tucked away from the city, was never part of my life plan. But, oh, how plans change, especially when your sister gets a $560,000 house as a gift, while you get nothing but criticism and a stinging, bitter emptiness. What happened next? It changed absolutely everything. I grew up in what most would call a successful, upper-middle-class family in Connecticut. My father, Richard, was a renowned corporate lawyer, his office always overflowing with awards. My mother, Patricia, a tenured economics professor, respected in her field. From the outside, we were the picture-perfect American family. Beautiful colonial home, manicured gardens, 3-car garage. Then there was my sister, Olivia, 3 years younger than me, but light years ahead in our parents' eyes. From her first day of kindergarten, Olivia was the golden child. Perfect report cards, science competitions, playing violin with the precision of someone twice her age. Our parents beamed at her accomplishments, throwing elaborate parties for every achievement, plastering her certificates and trophies across our living room walls. Me, I was what my father, not so affectionately, called the family wild card. My grades were average, mostly B's with the occasional A in subjects that actually sparked something in me. Standardized tests? Forget about it. My mind would wander to the compositions I wanted to photograph, not the equations on the page. Art was my sanctuary. Behind the lens of a camera, I found a clarity that simply eluded me in textbooks and lecture halls. Our home, you see, operated on a currency of achievement. Love and approval, they were commodities earned through success and ambition, never given freely. The dinner table was a nightly stage for Olivia to showcase her latest triumphs, while I just pushed food around my plate, dreading the inevitable question about my latest test score or college application status. When Olivia won first place at the state debate championship in 10th grade, our parents took the entire family to Disney World for a week. When I had my first photography exhibit at the local community center in my junior year, my mother attended for maybe 30 minutes before leaving for a faculty meeting. My father, he didn't show up at all. The pattern just continued. Every soccer match Olivia played featured both parents on the sidelines, cheering enthusiastically. When I stayed late after school, working in the darkroom, I walked home alone. More often than not, my wet prints carefully protected in my backpack. It wasn't that they were cruel parents. It was just they invested their time and attention where they saw the greatest return. The defining moment, the moment everything shifted, came during my senior year of high school. I'd been accepted to several colleges, including a prestigious art school in New York, and, ironically, the law program at my father's alma mater. The choice seemed obvious to everyone but me. The argument that erupted when I announced my decision to pursue photography instead of law, it still echoes in my memory. We were sitting at the fancy dining table, the one reserved for special occasions and serious discussions. The chandelier cast harsh shadows across my father's face as he slammed his hand on the polished wood. No daughter of mine is going to waste her life taking pictures. He roared, his voice cold and final. That is not a real career, Blake. That is a hobby. You need to think about your future. My mother, always the mediator, tried to soften the blow. Darling, we just want what's best for you. Photography is so competitive. So few people actually succeed. My voice shook, but I stood my ground. I am not going to law school. I am going to study photography. That is my decision. The silence that followed was deafening. Then my father stood up, straightened his tie, and delivered the ultimatum that would change our relationship forever. If you choose this path, you choose it alone. We will not pay for an art degree. Our money is for real education, not fantasies. I can still see Olivia's face across the table, a mixture of shock and something else, pity, relief that she wasn't the target of his disappointment, maybe a bit of both. That night, I made the decision that would shape the next decade of my life. I accepted the offer from the art school, knowing I'd have to work multiple jobs to afford it. I applied for every scholarship available, took out student loans, and prepared to forge my path alone. True to his word, my father cut off financial support entirely. My mother would occasionally slip me small amounts of money when we met for our infrequent coffee dates, but it was never enough to make a real difference. Meanwhile, Olivia was flourishing at her Ivy League university, her tuition, apartment, and expenses fully covered. Despite the crushing challenges, I graduated with my photography degree 4 years later. No one from my family attended the ceremony. I had an empty chair section, while my classmates were surrounded by proud parents and siblings holding flowers and balloons. That day, standing there in my cap and gown, I promised myself I would build a life that made me proud, even if it never impressed my parents. With my degree in hand and a portfolio of work I was proud of, I rented a tiny studio apartment in Brooklyn and began the uphill battle of establishing myself as a professional photographer. No safety net, no family connections to leverage, just raw determination and a well-worn camera. My first years in Brooklyn were a lesson in persistence. My apartment was barely 500 square feet, with a kitchenette so small I could touch both walls with outstretched arms. The bathroom had a perpetual leak that created musical drips at 3 a.m. But it was mine, paid for with my own hard-earned money, and that, to me, made it beautiful. I built my career from the ground up, starting with whatever photography jobs I could find. Wedding gigs for friends of friends who couldn't afford professional rates. Product photography for small businesses. Headshots for aspiring actors who were just as broke as I was. I worked as a barista 5 mornings a week to pay the rent, spent my afternoons editing photos, and devoted my evenings and weekends to building my portfolio and client base. My routine was exhausting, but it was purposeful. I learned to live frugally, cooking simple meals at home, shopping at thrift stores for clothes and furniture. Every spare dollar went toward camera equipment or my student loan payments. I created a website showcasing my best work and spent hours networking at gallery openings and industry events, handing out business cards I designed and printed at the local coffee shop. Holidays were the hardest. I would take the train back to Connecticut, carrying carefully wrapped but modest gifts, only to spend the weekend feeling like an outsider in my childhood home. Conversations revolved around Olivia's achievements or my parents' social circle. When I shared news about the small exhibition where my work was featured or a new client I'd landed, the responses were polite, but utterly disinterested. "That sounds nice, dear," my mother would say before swiftly turning the conversation to Olivia's latest accomplishment. My father was less subtle. During one Thanksgiving dinner, after I mentioned booking my first major commercial shoot, he looked up from his plate with a dismissive glance. "It's good you're finding work, Blake, but when are you going to get serious about your future? You're nearly 30. Olivia is already on track to make partner at her firm, and she's engaged to that brilliant neurosurgeon. What do you have to show for yourself?" The comparison to Olivia was constant and, frankly, crushing. Her career at a prestigious law firm was flourishing. She had met Daniel, a neurosurgeon from a well-connected family, at a charity gala. They lived in an upscale apartment in Manhattan, took luxurious vacations, and were planning a lavish wedding. Her life followed the exact blueprint my parents had envisioned. Still, I persisted in maintaining a relationship with my family. Monthly phone calls with my mother, occasional emails updating them on my life, attendance at family gatherings where I weathered the subtle digs and disappointed looks. I held on to the hope that eventually they would see that I was building something meaningful, even if it didn't fit their narrow definition of success. Then came the call that changed everything. My grandmother, my mother's mother, had passed away unexpectedly. My grandfather had died just 6 months earlier, and the double loss left our family reeling. Despite our differences, I had always been close to my grandparents. They were the only ones who showed genuine interest in my photography, proudly displaying my work in their home and introducing me as our talented artist to their friends. When I was struggling most with my parents' rejection, my grandmother would remind me true happiness comes from following your own path, not someone else's expectations. My grandfather would add with a wink, some people just need more time to see what's right in front of them. They lived modestly but comfortably on a beautiful piece of land about 2 hours outside the city, 5 acres of mixed woodland and open space with a cozy farmhouse they had renovated themselves over the decades. It was my childhood sanctuary, a place where I could breathe freely and be accepted completely. The reading of their will took place 2 weeks after my grandmother's funeral. The family gathered in my grandparents' lawyer's office, a somber affair made tense by unspoken expectations. I sat quietly in the corner, still processing my grief, when the lawyer cleared his throat and began to read. To our beloved granddaughter, Blake, we leave our 5-acre property and farmhouse, knowing she will appreciate its beauty and find peace there as we did. The room fell silent. My father's face flushed red, my mother's lips pressed into a thin line. Olivia looked genuinely shocked. I sat frozen, unable to process what I had just heard. The lawyer continued, explaining that the rest of my grandparents' modest savings and possessions would be divided equally among all the grandchildren. After the meeting, my father cornered me in the hallway, his voice low but intense. You need to sell that property. It's not practical for you to keep it. We can split the proceeds among the family. I was still in shock. I need time to think, was all I could manage to say. There is nothing to think about, he insisted. You live in Brooklyn. You cannot maintain a property that far away. Be reasonable for once in your life. I left with the property deed and a head spinning with possibilities. I had no idea what I would do with the land, but something deep inside told me that selling it would be a betrayal of my grandparents' trust in me. The first time I visited the property after it became mine, I felt overwhelmed by both emotion and responsibility. Standing on the dirt driveway, keys in hand, I surveyed what was now my land. The farmhouse needed work. After sitting empty for months, the white paint was peeling from the clapboards, and the wraparound porch had begun to sag in one corner. The once immaculate garden was overgrown, wildflowers and weeds competing for space in the beds my grandmother had tended so lovingly. Yet, despite its neglected state, the property held an undeniable magic. Tall oaks and maples surrounded the clearing where the house stood, their leaves rustling in the gentle breeze. A small stream cut through the western edge of the property, its gentle burbling a soothing soundtrack. Birds called from the trees, and occasionally a deer would appear at the forest edge, regarding me with curious eyes before disappearing back into the shadows. The land was situated in what had once been a rural area, but was slowly being encroached upon by development. Still, it maintained its sense of isolation and peace, protected by the buffer of trees and the winding country road that led to the main highway. The nearest neighbor was a quarter-mile away, a small organic farm run by a middle-aged man named Warren, whom I remembered vaguely from childhood visits. I spent that first day just walking the property, reacquainting myself with its contours and secrets. The treehouse my grandfather had built that was weathered but still standing. The fire pit where we had roasted marshmallows on summer evenings. The small apple orchard with trees bent and gnarled but still producing fruit. With each step, memories flooded back, along with a growing certainty that this place was meant to be part of my future. My practical side knew my father was partially right. Maintaining the property while living in Brooklyn would be challenging. The house needed repairs I couldn't afford. The land required regular attention to prevent it from becoming completely wild. Property taxes would be due regardless of whether I lived there or not. Selling would be the sensible choice. But when had I ever taken the sensible choice? I returned to Brooklyn with soil still under my fingernails and a head full of half-formed ideas. I was surprised to receive a call from my father the next day, asking me to attend a family meeting at my parents' house that weekend. His tone made it clear this was not a request, but a summons. When I arrived that Saturday, the tension in the house was palpable. My parents sat stiffly in the living room. Olivia and Daniel, her fiancé, sat beside them, forming a united front. I took a seat on the ottoman, already feeling outnumbered. My father wasted no time getting to the point. We've been discussing the property situation, and we all agree that the best course of action is to sell. The real estate market in that area is growing, and we could get a good price that would benefit everyone. By everyone, you mean you? I said, unable to keep the edge from my voice. Blake, be reasonable, my mother interjected. What are you going to do with 5 acres? You can barely keep that tiny apartment of yours in order. Olivia leaned forward, her expression a practiced mask of concern. We're just thinking of what's practical. You're always struggling financially. This could give you a cushion. And what would my share be exactly? I asked, already suspecting the answer. My father cleared his throat. Well, given that your grandparents already gave you the property itself, which is the bulk of their estate, it would be fair if the proceeds were divided among the rest of us. The injustice of it struck me like a physical blow. So I get nothing. I sell my inheritance and hand over the money to all of you? You need to think about what's best for the family, my father said, his lawyer voice emerging. This is about being practical. No, I replied, a lifetime of frustration bubbling to the surface. This is about control. This is about you being unable to accept that I might have something valuable that you do not control. The argument escalated quickly. Words were said that could not be taken back. And then, in a moment I will never forget, my father stood up and pointed his finger at me, his face contorted with anger. You have been nothing but a disappointment since the day you chose that worthless career, he shouted. A complete and utter failure. We gave you every opportunity, and you threw it all away for what? Pictures? While your sister has made something of herself, built a real career, started a real life. The room fell silent. Even Olivia looked shocked at the outburst. A real life, I repeated quietly, my voice barely a whisper. You mean the life you orchestrated for her? The one you bankrolled completely? Daniel shifted uncomfortably on the sofa. Olivia wouldn't meet my eyes. What does that mean? My mother asked, her voice suddenly cautious. It means I know about the house, I said, looking directly at Olivia. The $560,000 house you got as a wedding present, while I was working 3 jobs to make rent. The secret that had been kept from me tumbled out in the ensuing silence. My parents had purchased a luxury townhouse for Olivia and Daniel as a wedding gift, complete with custom renovations and designer furnishings. $560,000 of support, while I had been cut off completely for pursuing my passion. That was different, my father insisted. Olivia chose a sensible path. She earned our support. She earned your love. I corrected him. I never did. I stood up, suddenly feeling calmer than I had in years. I am not selling the property. Not now. Not ever. It is the one thing in my life that came without conditions, without judgment. I am keeping it. You are making a mistake, my father warned. No, I said, heading for the door. For the first time in a long time, I am absolutely certain I am not. I left without looking back, ignoring my mother's calls to return and discuss things rationally. In my car, I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for years. Then I did something I had never done before. I drove straight to the property, arriving as the sun was setting over the trees. I parked in the overgrown driveway, walked to the porch, and sat on the steps. Okay, I whispered to the darkening sky. Let's do this. 2 years passed in what felt like both an instant and an eternity. The day after that fateful family meeting, I made a decision that shocked even myself. I gave notice on my Brooklyn apartment, put most of my possessions in storage, and moved temporarily into the farmhouse with just the bare essentials and my camera equipment. The first few months were brutal. The house needed significant repairs that I couldn't afford all at once. I slept in the small guest bedroom, the only room without water damage or drafty windows. I showered with a garden hose rigged to an outdoor spigot until I could afford to fix the plumbing. I learned to patch roof leaks, replace rotted wood, and repair crumbling plaster through YouTube tutorials and pure, gritty trial and error. My career underwent a transformation as dramatic as my living situation. Unable to continue my urban photography business, I pivoted to what was literally in my backyard. I began documenting my journey of restoring the old farmhouse and reconnecting with the land. I captured the changing seasons, the wildlife that visited my property, the process of clearing overgrown paths, and uncovering forgotten garden beds. At first, I posted these images on social media simply to stay connected to the world beyond my 5 acres. To my surprise, people responded with enthusiasm. My followers grew steadily as I shared not just beautiful nature photography, but the raw, unfiltered reality of my new life. The collapsed ceiling I discovered after a heavy rain. The family of raccoons I evicted from the attic. The first successful loaf of bread I baked in the ancient wood stove. 6 months in, a popular lifestyle blog featured my story and photography. Overnight, my audience tripled. A sustainable living magazine commissioned a photo essay about my experience. A small but steady income from my online presence supplemented the freelance photography jobs I took in nearby towns. With careful budgeting and growing recognition, I began to transform the property according to my vision. I converted the barn into a photography studio where I could work regardless of weather conditions. I planted a vegetable garden using heirloom seeds my grandmother had saved. I restored the apple orchard, learning to prune and care for the aging trees from a local farmer. That local farmer was Warren, my nearest neighbor. He appeared at my door one spring morning with a basket of fresh eggs and an offer to help with the sagging porch. In his 50s, with weathered hands and kind eyes, Warren became an unexpected friend and mentor. He taught me practical skills my education had never covered: how to split firewood properly, which wild plants were edible, how to repair an engine, when to plant, and when to harvest. In return, I helped him establish an online presence for his small organic farm, photographing his produce and creating a website that attracted new customers from surrounding towns. Our friendship evolved naturally, 2 solitary people finding unexpected connection through shared work and mutual respect. My tiny house movement-inspired social media followers turned into a modest but lucrative business opportunity. I began hosting weekend photography retreats, teaching small groups of enthusiasts how to capture the beauty of nature. The old farmhouse, now partially renovated with the help of Warren and skills I never knew I possessed, became a rustic guest house. I built 2 tiny cabins deeper in the woods for additional accommodation, each designed to blend with the natural environment while providing simple comfort. The irony was not lost on me. The career my parents had dismissed as impractical was now supporting me completely. The property they had insisted I could not maintain had become both my home and livelihood. I had created something uniquely mine on my own terms. My relationship with my family remained distant, but it no longer dominated my thoughts. I sent Christmas cards and birthday messages. I responded politely, but briefly to my mother's occasional texts checking in on me. I declined invitations to family gatherings with simple excuses about work commitments. The constant ache of their disapproval had faded to a dull twinge that surfaced only occasionally. I found peace in my new routine. Mornings spent tending to the land, days filled with creative work in my studio or hosting workshops, evenings on the rebuilt porch with a cup of tea, watching fireflies emerge as the sun set. I made friends in the small community, people who knew me only as Blake the photographer, not as Blake the disappointment. One crisp fall afternoon, as I was photographing the vibrant foliage along my stream, I heard the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. Visitors weren't unusual by this point. I often had workshop participants or clients coming to the studio. But when I rounded the corner of the house, I stopped short at the sight of a sleek black SUV I didn't recognize. Even more surprising was the person standing beside it, staring open-mouthed at my renovated farmhouse with its fresh paint and flourishing garden beds. Olivia. She looked both the same and completely different. The designer clothes and perfect hair were familiar, but there was something new in her expression, something I couldn't quite identify. When she spotted me approaching, camera in hand, her eyes widened. "Blake, is that really you?" I nodded, suddenly aware of my work boots, faded jeans, and flannel shirt. "What are you doing here, Olivia?" She gestured vaguely at the property. I was driving to a client meeting and took the back road. I almost didn't recognize the place. She paused, seeming genuinely flustered. "You live here now? You actually fixed it up?" "I do, and I did," I replied simply. She shook her head in apparent disbelief. "I had no idea. No one did. Dad said you were probably just sitting on the property until you got desperate enough to sell." The mention of our father brought back a flood of memories. "Why are you really here, Olivia?" I asked, my guard rising. She looked away, then back at me, with an expression I hadn't seen from her before: vulnerability. "Did you know this whole area is being developed? There are luxury homes going up less than a mile from here. The Ridgeline Resort Company bought out 3 farms already." I nodded slowly. I had heard rumors. Warren, my neighbor, mentioned something about development pressure. "Blake, your land could be worth $2 million now. Maybe more." She wasn't asking a question. She was stating a fact. "Is that why you stopped by? To tell me about property values?" Her composure cracked slightly. Then, to my shock, her eyes filled with tears. "We talked about it, okay? The whole family. Dad thought if I saw you, talked to you, he said you might listen to me about selling." The revelation stung less than it would have 2 years ago. "I see. And what commission would you get for convincing me?" Olivia flinched as if I had slapped her. "You know what? You're right. I came here with an agenda, but standing here now, seeing what you've built," she gestured at the property again, "I can see why you would never sell this." The admission surprised me enough that I really looked at her for the first time. The designer outfit couldn't hide the dark circles under her eyes. The perfect manicure didn't disguise the tension in her hands. "Are you okay?" I asked, the question emerging before I could stop it. She laughed, a brittle sound with no humor. "Am I okay? Let's see. My marriage is falling apart because Daniel works 100-hour weeks, and when he's home, we have nothing in common except debt. My job is killing me slowly. The house, that ridiculous house Mom and Dad bought us, has a leaking roof that will cost $30,000 to fix. But I can never admit any of this because I'm the successful one, right? The one who did everything right." I didn't know what to say. This wasn't the confident, perfect Olivia I had grown up envying and resenting in equal measure. "I should go," she said abruptly, wiping at her eyes. "I have a meeting." She got back into her SUV, but before closing the door, she looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "You know what the worst part is? You look happy, Blake. Actually happy." Then she was on her phone, and I could hear her voice rising as she pulled away. "Dad, you will not believe what Blake has done with that property. We need to." The rest of her words were lost as the SUV disappeared down the driveway, leaving me standing alone in the yard, camera still in hand, wondering what storm was brewing on the horizon. That unexpected visit from Olivia left me unsettled for days. I found myself glancing toward the driveway whenever I heard a car on the road, half expecting to see my entire family arriving to confront me. But a week passed with no further contact. Then, too, I began to relax, focusing again on my work and the approaching winter. I had just finished winterizing the beehives Warren had helped me establish when I heard another vehicle approaching. This time, I recognized the sound of Olivia's SUV before I saw it. What I hadn't expected was to see her parking beside a rental car that had arrived moments earlier. Olivia emerged from her vehicle, looking even more polished than during her last visit, as if she had armored herself in designer clothing. From the rental car stepped Daniel, her husband, looking uncomfortable in casual clothes that still managed to scream, "Expensive." They stood awkwardly in my driveway, clearly waiting for something or someone. I didn't have to wonder for long. Another car appeared, my parents' luxury sedan that I recognized instantly. My stomach tightened as they parked and stepped out. My father's face set in the determined expression he wore to court, my mother looking anxious beside him. "What is this, a family reunion?" I called out, trying to keep my voice light despite the anxiety churning inside me. "We need to talk, Blake," my father said, skipping any greeting, "about the property situation." Before I could respond, Warren's pickup truck rumbled up the drive, coming to a stop behind the lineup of expensive vehicles. He nodded to me as he climbed out, a silent message of support that warmed me despite the circumstances. "I invited Warren to join us," I said, gesturing to my neighbor, "since any discussion about this land affects him, too." My father frowned but said nothing as Warren approached, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Shall we go inside?" I suggested, leading the unexpected gathering toward my home. The looks on my family's faces as they entered the renovated farmhouse were almost worth the tension of the moment. The sagging floors had been leveled and refinished to a warm, golden glow. The crumbling plaster walls had been replaced with sustainable materials in soft earth tones. The kitchen, once outdated and dysfunctional, now featured reclaimed wood countertops and energy-efficient appliances that blended harmoniously with the vintage charm of the original space. "You did all this yourself?" my mother asked, unable to keep the surprise from her voice as she ran her hand along a particularly beautiful stretch of countertop that Warren had crafted from a fallen oak on my property. "With help," I acknowledged, nodding toward Warren. We settled in the living room, my parents and Olivia with Daniel on the sofa. I had reupholstered myself. Warren and I sat in chairs opposite them. Through the large windows, the autumn forest created a backdrop of golden and crimson. This is quite rustic, my father said, clearly struggling to find something negative to say about the space. Thank you, I replied simply. Now, what is this about? My father cleared his throat, falling into his lawyer persona. As Olivia may have mentioned, this area is being rapidly developed. The Ridgeline Resort Group has purchased several surrounding properties and is planning a major luxury development. Golf courses, spas, high-end homes, the works. I'm aware. 3 of my neighbors have sold already. They're offering extraordinary prices, he continued, well above market value. Your 5 acres are particularly valuable because of the stream and the elevation. They're very interested. And how do you know that? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Daniel spoke for the first time. I have a patient who sits on their board. When he heard about our connection to property in the area, he asked if we might facilitate an introduction. I see. I looked at each of them in turn. And you all came here today to convince me to sell? To discuss the possibility, my mother corrected gently. This could be a wonderful opportunity for all of us. All of us. I repeated. So, you're still expecting a share of my inheritance? My father shifted uncomfortably. Blake, be reasonable. This land has appreciated enormously in value through no effort of your own. It would be fair to distribute the windfall among the family. No effort. I gestured around at the renovated space. I have put 2 years of sweat and every penny I had into this place. I built a business here. I built a life here. Taking pictures is not a real business, my father dismissed. Actually, Warren interjected, his quiet voice commanding attention. Blake runs one of the most successful businesses in the county now. The photography retreats bring visitors from all over the country. They support the local economy, staying in town, eating at our restaurants, shopping in our stores. My father looked at Warren as if seeing him for the first time. And you are Warren Milligan, Blake's neighbor and friend. He said the last word with emphasis. Olivia, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly spoke up. Blake, no one is trying to take anything from you, but this could solve problems for everyone. You could buy a better property somewhere else, somewhere more convenient. We could all benefit. What problems would it solve for you, Olivia? I asked directly. She glanced at Daniel, then back at me. That's not relevant. I think it is. You said your marriage was struggling. You mentioned debt. Is this about money? Daniel's face flushed. That's private. Not if you're here asking me to sell my home to solve your problems. I countered. My mother looked shocked. Olivia, what is Blake talking about? The facade Olivia had maintained for so long finally cracked completely. The house is underwater, Mom. The mortgage, the renovations, the lifestyle we thought we were supposed to have. Daniel's medical school debt, my student loans. We are drowning. But your careers, your salaries, my father sputtered. Go to keeping up appearances. Daniel said quietly. The cars, the clothes, the vacations, the social obligations, the networking events you insist we attend. The country club membership you gifted us that comes with monthly fees we can barely afford. The revelation hung in the air like smoke. My seemingly perfect sister and her successful husband were living a life they couldn't sustain, trapped in a prison of expectations and appearances. I had no idea, my mother whispered, genuinely stunned. Of course you didn't, Olivia said bitterly. We never talk about real things in this family, just achievements and appearances. I looked at my sister with new eyes, seeing not the golden child who had everything handed to her, but someone as trapped by our parents' expectations as I had been. The difference was that I had escaped. She was still living in that cage. I am not selling the land, I said finally, gently. not to solve financial problems, not to make developers richer, not for any reason. This is my home. You're being selfish, my father accused, but his voice lacked its usual conviction. No, I replied. For the first time in my life, I am being true to myself. And I think that scares you more than anything. Warren cleared his throat. If I might make a suggestion, Blake's property is not just valuable for development. It is valuable as it is. The photography business is thriving. The organic garden supplies local restaurants. The tiny cabins bring tourism to our community without disrupting its character. What's your point? My father asked impatiently. My point is that Blake has created something worth preserving, something that benefits more than just one family or one corporation, something sustainable. I felt a rush of gratitude toward Warren, who had articulated something I had felt but couldn't express. He's right. What I have built here matters, not just to me, but to this community. Olivia looked at me with an expression I had never seen from her before. Something like respect. I think I understand now. When I drove by and saw what you had created, I was jealous. Blake, you look so content, so sure of yourself. I have never felt that way. Not once. Her admission stunned me into silence. My perfect golden sister, jealous of me? So that's it? You simply refuse to consider the needs of your family? My father pressed, but I could hear the defeat in his voice. I have considered them, I assured him, but I have also considered my own needs, the needs of this land, and the needs of this community. The answer is still no. As the tense conversation continued, Warren excused himself to check on something outside. When he returned a few minutes later, he had a basket filled with fresh eggs, late-season vegetables, and a jar of honey from my hives. Maybe you folks would like to take these back with you, he offered to my parents. Everything grown right here on Blake's property, some of the best produce in the county. The simple gesture somehow broke the tension. My mother accepted the basket with genuine thanks. My father stood, straightening his jacket in a gesture I had seen 1,000 times. We should go, he said stiffly. We have a long drive back. As they gathered to leave, Olivia hung back, letting Daniel walk ahead with our parents. When we were alone in the kitchen, she turned to me. I never understood why you walked away from everything they offered you. She said quietly, Now, I think maybe you were the smart one all along. It was never about smart, I replied. It was about authentic, about finding my own definition of success. She nodded slowly. I need to find mine. I think you can. You know, I told her, it's never too late to change direction. Even with all their expectations, all the investment they've made in me becoming who they wanted me to be. Especially then, I said, take it from someone who disappointed them thoroughly. The world doesn't end. You just begin again. She hugged me then, an awkward but genuine embrace that felt like the first real connection we had shared in decades. I'll call you, she promised. I watched from the porch as they all drove away, Warren standing silently beside me. When the last car disappeared down the drive, he turned to me with a small smile. Quite a family you have there. They are, I agreed, for better or worse. You stood your ground, he observed. Not many would have with that much pressure. I looked out over my land, at the life I had built from nothing but determination and faith in myself. Some things are worth fighting for. Life settled back into its rhythm after the confrontation with my family. Autumn deepened into winter, covering my 5 acres with a pristine blanket of snow. I continued hosting smaller, more intimate photography workshops focused on winter landscapes. The cozy farmhouse with its wood stove and thick quilts became a welcoming haven for guests seeking respite from their busy lives. Warren and I spent the cold months planning improvements for spring. We sketched designs for an expanded organic garden, discussed adding beehives, and drafted blueprints for 2 more tiny cabins to accommodate growing interest in my photography retreats. Our friendship had evolved into something deeper, a partnership built on mutual respect and shared values. As the snow began to melt, revealing the first green shoots of early spring, Olivia called. Our conversation was awkward at first, months of silence creating a barrier that took time to dismantle. But gradually, as we spoke about neutral topics, the tension eased. I left the firm, she said finally, the words tumbling out in a rush. You did what? I sat down on my porch steps, stunned by her announcement. I quit my job, left the partnership track. Daniel and I are selling the house to Olivia. That is huge. Are you okay? She laughed, a genuine sound I had rarely heard from her. I think I am. For the first time in forever, I feel like I can breathe. Daniel is cutting back his hours, too. We're renting a small apartment while we figure things out. What did Mom and Dad say? I asked, already imagining their reaction. Dad didn't speak to me for 2 weeks, she admitted. Mom cycles between concern and disappointment. But you know what? I'm sleeping through the night for the first time in years. We talked for over an hour. Really talked, perhaps for the first time as adults, about expectations and appearances, about finding happiness versus achieving success, about the courage it takes to disappoint the people who raised you. I've been thinking about what you said. Olivia told me before we hung up about finding my own definition of success. I'm looking into environmental law, using my degree for conservation work instead of corporate profits. That sounds perfect for you, I said, meaning it. I'd like to come visit again sometime, she added hesitantly. Just me, to see your place properly, maybe learn a bit about what you do. I would like that, I replied, surprised to discover how much I meant it. True to her word, Olivia visited a month later. She arrived wearing jeans and hiking boots, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, looking younger and more relaxed than I had seen her in years. We spent the weekend exploring the property, talking about our childhoods and the different paths our lives had taken. She asked thoughtful questions about my photography business, genuinely interested in understanding what I had built. On Sunday afternoon, as we sat on the porch drinking tea, she broached the subject we had been avoiding. Mom and Dad want to visit, she said, watching my reaction carefully. They asked me to ask you if that would be okay. I set my mug down slowly, processing the request. Why now? Olivia shrugged. I think seeing me make such a big change shocked them. Dad keeps talking about legacy and family connections. I think he's finally realizing he might lose both his daughters if he doesn't bend a little. And the property, the pressure to sell, I think that ship has sailed. She continued. Besides, I may have mentioned to Dad that what you have created here is worth more than any development check. The visit was scheduled for the following month. I spent weeks preparing, not to impress them, but to show them honestly what I had built. Warren helped me finish the new studio space in the renovated barn. I printed my best photographs and arranged them in a gallery wall. I harvested early vegetables from the garden and collected fresh eggs from the chickens I now raised. When the day arrived, I stood in the driveway, watching their car approach with a strange mixture of anticipation and dread. Warren had offered to make himself scarce, but I had asked him to stay. His steady presence beside me was a reminder of the life and community I had created, independent of my family's approval. My parents emerged from their car, looking slightly disoriented, as if they had accidentally arrived at the wrong address. My father wore casual clothes that still managed to look stiff and formal. My mother carried a houseplant as a gift, clutching it like a shield. Blake, she said, stepping forward to kiss my cheek. The place looks different than I remember. It has changed a lot, I agreed. Come in, I'll show you around. The tour was awkward at first, my parents clearly struggling to reconcile the successful business and beautiful home with their perception of my failed career choice. My mother asked polite questions about the renovations. My father remained mostly silent, his expression unreadable as he took in the evidence of my thriving, independent life. The dynamic shifted when we reached the barn studio. The large, open space was filled with natural light from skylights I had installed myself. My photographs covered the walls, a visual journey through seasons and landscapes. A long farmhouse table occupied the center of the room, set up for the workshops I regularly hosted. "These are all your work?" my mother asked, moving closer to examine a series of sunrise images captured from my property. "They are," I confirmed. "They're quite beautiful," she admitted, something like surprise in her voice. My father stood before a large framed photograph of the farmhouse in winter, snow blanketing the roof, smoke curling from the chimney, golden light spilling from the windows. It was my favorite image, capturing not just the physical structure, but the feeling of home it represented. "This is remarkable," he said quietly, almost to himself. "The quality of light, it tells a story." "That's what I tried to do," I explained, caught off guard by his comment. "Tell stories through images. Capture moments and feelings, not just scenes." He nodded, still studying the photograph. "I think I understand now." We moved to the porch for lunch. The table set with food I had grown or made myself, fresh salad from the garden, eggs from my chickens, bread I had baked that morning, honey from my hives, wine from a local vineyard where I had photographed the harvest. As we ate, the conversation gradually became less strained. My mother asked about my business model, her academic mind engaging with the practical aspects of what I had built. My father, to my surprise, asked thoughtful questions about my photography techniques and creative process. Warren shared stories about the local community, the farmers market we both participated in, the conservation efforts to protect the watershed that ran through our properties. He spoke about my contributions to the area, the tourism my workshops brought, the articles and features that had put our small town on the map. "You have created something substantial here," my father finally acknowledged, setting down his glass of wine. "Something with real value, not just financially, but intrinsically." Coming from him, it was an extraordinary admission. I felt a weight I had carried for years begin to lighten. "Why did you never come to my exhibits?" I asked suddenly, the question emerging before I could stop it. Even in high school, when it would have been easy, my parents exchanged uncomfortable glances. It was my mother who answered. "We were afraid," she said simply, "afraid you were making a mistake we could not fix, afraid you would struggle and suffer, afraid we had failed as parents if you did not follow the path we thought was safe. So instead of supporting my choice, you punish me for making it," I said, the old hurt surfacing despite my best efforts. "We thought we were protecting you," my father said. "We were wrong." The simple admission hung in the air between us. Not quite an apology, but an acknowledgement that carried its own weight. "And Olivia?" I asked. "The house, the financial support." My father looked genuinely remorseful. "We thought we were doing the right thing, setting her up for success. But look how that turned out. She was miserable in that perfect life we helped create." "We made many mistakes," my mother added softly, "with both of you in different ways." As the afternoon light began to fade, casting long shadows across the yard, my father stood and walked to the edge of the porch, looking out over the land. "I would not have chosen this for you," he said finally. "This place, this life. I would have pushed you towards something I understood, something with a clear path. And I would have been wrong." He turned to face me. "You found your own way, created your own success. I am proud of that, even if I don't entirely understand it. From my father, those words were the equivalent of a standing ovation. I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes. Thank you, I said simply. As they prepared to leave, my mother hugged me tightly. We would like to visit again, she said. If that would be all right. I would like that, I replied, surprised to find I meant it. My father shook Warren's hand, then mine, holding on a moment longer than necessary. You have a beautiful home, he said. Thank you for sharing it with us. We stood in the driveway, Warren and I, watching their car disappear down the road as the setting sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold. You okay? Warren asked quietly. I nodded, feeling a complex mixture of emotions I couldn't quite name. I think so. It's not fixed, not completely, but it's a start. He took my hand, his palm warm against mine. Beginnings are good, he said. I'm partial to them myself. As we walked back toward the house, I looked at the life I had built from nothing but determination and a piece of inherited land. A home, a business, a purpose, and now, perhaps, the beginnings of a healed family and a new kind of love. Not the life anyone had planned for me, but the one I had created for myself. 1 year later, I stood on the newly built observation deck, overlooking my property, now transformed in ways I never could have imagined. The original farmhouse stood at the center, restored to its former charm with modern, sustainable improvements. The studio barn had been expanded to accommodate larger photography workshops and community events. 3 tiny cabins were nestled among the trees, each with its own unique character, providing accommodation for guests seeking respite from city life. The most significant addition was the small eco-retreat center we had constructed near the stream. A beautiful, light-filled space built from reclaimed materials and designed to have minimal environmental impact. I hosted extended photography residencies, environmental education programs, and wellness retreats. What had begun as a personal sanctuary had evolved into a thriving community space that honored the land while sharing its beauty with others. The journey to this point had been filled with unexpected turns. After that first tentative visit, my parents had gradually become more involved in my life. My mother, with her academic background, had helped me develop an educational curriculum for school groups visiting the property. My father, to everyone's surprise, including his own, had taken up photography as a hobby and occasionally joined my weekend workshops. Olivia had undergone the most dramatic transformation. After leaving her corporate law position, she had found work with an environmental nonprofit, using her legal expertise to protect natural spaces from overdevelopment. She and Daniel had divorced amicably, both recognizing they had built their relationship on external expectations rather than genuine connection. She now lived in a modest house 30 minutes from my property and visited regularly, often bringing her rescue dog, who loved running through the open fields. Warren had become not just my partner in business, but in life. Our relationship had evolved naturally from friendship to love, built on shared values and mutual respect. He had moved into the farmhouse the previous spring, bringing his carpentry tools and quiet wisdom. Together, we continued to improve the property, each project reflecting our commitment to sustainable living and community connection. The path to healing with my family had not been straightforward. There were still moments of tension, old patterns that emerged in times of stress. My father occasionally made comments about real careers before catching himself. My mother sometimes lapsed into comparing Olivia and me, an ingrained habit difficult to break. But these instances were becoming rarer, replaced by genuine efforts to understand and accept the adults their daughters had become. The most profound change had been in my relationship with Olivia. The competitive dynamic that had defined our childhood had transformed into a supportive bond. We had spent hours talking through our shared past, acknowledging the ways our parents' expectations had shaped and sometimes damaged us both. The golden child and the disappointment, each carrying our own burdens, had finally found common ground as sisters and friends. "Are you ready for the group?" Warren asked, joining me on the deck. 20 photographers would be arriving that afternoon for a week-long workshop. "Almost," I replied, leaning into his solid presence. "Just taking a moment to appreciate how far we've come." He nodded, understanding as always. From a rundown farmhouse to this, pretty incredible. "Not just the property," I clarified. "Everything. My family, my work, finding you." Warren smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling in the way I had come to love. Finding ourselves, I think, separately and together. My parents and Olivia would be joining us for dinner that evening, a monthly tradition we had established. These gatherings were not always perfect, but they were authentic in a way our family interactions had never been before. We talked about real things, disagreed respectfully, and left with the understanding that love did not require agreement or identical paths. The financial aspect of my life had evolved as well. While I had steadfastly refused to sell the property to developers, I had found ways to make it financially sustainable and even profitable. The photography retreats, cabin rentals, and educational programs generated steady income. I had published a book of images documenting the seasonal changes of the land, which had received critical acclaim and opened doors to exhibition opportunities. Most surprisingly, my father had established a family foundation focused on environmental education and land conservation. The initial funding had come from the sale of their oversized house, as they downsized to a comfortable condo closer to my property. The foundation's first project had been purchasing the land adjacent to mine when it came on the market, protecting it from development and expanding the natural buffer around my 5 acres. "Your grandparents would be proud," my mother had said when the foundation was announced. They always believed in preserving beautiful places. I thought of them often as I walked the land, imagining their joy at seeing how their modest inheritance had blossomed into something that benefited not just me, but an entire community. Their gift had come without conditions or expectations, a rare form of love in my experience. The afternoon sun cast golden light across the property as I prepared to welcome the workshop participants. From the deck, I could see the entirety of what we had built. The vegetable gardens bursting with fall harvest, the apple orchard heavy with fruit, the beehives Warren had expanded to produce honey we sold at local markets, the wildflower meadow we had restored to support native pollinators. But the physical transformations paled in comparison to the inner journey. I had learned to define success on my own terms, to build a life aligned with my values rather than external expectations. I had discovered that standing firm in your truth, even when it disappoints others, is not selfish, but necessary for authentic living. Most importantly, I had found that families like photographs can be recomposed to create something new and beautiful from what already exists. As I watched the first cars begin to arrive, I felt a deep sense of contentment. Not because everything was perfect, but because I had created a life that reflected who I truly was, not who anyone else thought I should be. The land my grandparents left me had become more than property, more than an inheritance. It had become the canvas on which I painted my authentic life, stroke by stroke, choice by choice. "Ready to share your wisdom with the world?" Warren asked, gesturing toward the approaching guests. I smiled, feeling the warmth of gratitude spread through me. "Ready as I'll ever be." That evening, after the workshop participants had settled into their cabins and my family had returned home, following dinner, Warren and I sat on the porch swing watching fireflies dance across the yard. The same porch where years earlier I had sat alone, wondering what would become of this inherited land and my uncharted future. You know what I think the real inheritance was? I said softly, not the land itself, but the belief that I deserved a life that made me happy, that I was allowed to choose my own path. Warren nodded, his arm warm around my shoulders. The best legacies are not things, but permissions. Permission to be yourself. Permission to build something meaningful. As darkness settled around us, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. From the disappointed daughter to confident creator, from isolated artist to community builder, from a person seeking approval to one offering inspiration. The road had not been easy or straight, but every difficult turn had led me exactly where I needed to be. What are you thinking about? Warren asked, noticing my contemplative silence. That true success is not measured in property or possessions. I replied, finding the words for the lesson I had lived. It is measured in authenticity, in the courage to build a life true to yourself, even when others do not understand, in creating space where others feel free to do the same. In the distance, an owl called softly from the forest edge, a familiar evening sound that never failed to remind me how fortunate I was to call this place home. Not just the physical location, but the life I had created here, the community I had built, the peace I had found. I wouldn't change any of it. I whispered, not even the hardest parts, because in the end, what had seemed like rejection had become the doorway to acceptance. What had felt like failure had transformed into the most meaningful success. And what had been given as consolation had become my greatest blessing. Have you ever had to choose between family expectations and your own authentic path? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. Remember, your unique journey has value even when others might not see it yet. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that choosing their own path is not just okay, but sometimes the most courageous thing they can do. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and may you find the courage to build a life that feels true to you, regardless of what anyone else believes you should be doing.